How many, please? One adult and 3 children, please. Thank you. Good children.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Watch your step, please.
Hey, how much to go in?
The charge is 5 cents, please.
Gee, that's tough. All I got is 1 cent. Get it? Let's see. There ought to be some way of getting into this joint. Uh-oh. Hi, gang. And now if you'll all be quiet, we'll start the show. I drew this cartoon all by myself, but shucks, it wasn't hard because I'm an artist. I hope you like it. Yeah, thank you.
Between cartoons and just movement. It's the imagination that's there. It's whether they make you laugh, whether they have something that comes out of the drawing. That's a very important distinction.
It's a name that just defines outstanding brilliance in animation and film comedy.
Sort of was in his little niche where he did things for studios, but really pushed the envelope in terms of what those things could be.
The gags just came out of nowhere. I never knew where it was going to go.
He was blind in one eye, of course, from his famous accident. But that didn't seem to bother him at all, you know. He got along just fine.
They were extremely elastic, spastic, and movable, and could do things that no one else even tried to do.
So it gave me a great appreciation for how powerful a humorous drawing could be.
Let's go back in time to Taylor, Texas on February 26, 1908. Frederick Bean Avery was born to 1908 AD, not BC.
Oh, all right. But time does fly, don't it, Johnny?
Where were we? Oh yeah. To George and Mary Avery. Tex was very artistic as a child and dreamed of one day working and creating his own comic strip. In high school, Tex would illustrate the Angeles.
I was the only guy who can handle a pencil, who would hold one.
He was quite a funny cartoonist even when he was in high school. He was just kind of learning how to draw, but the sense of humor was there already.
Tex spent a summer at the Chicago Art Institute.
Tex came to Los Angeles around, I believe, New Year's Day, 1928, and he was about maybe 19, 20 at the time.
I think he tried to sell a couple of features to the Los Angeles Times.
He pretty much started off doing jobs such as like loading fruits and vegetables into ships.
One of his first jobs he had in animation was working for Walter Lantz. I think he was started as a cell washer, and then he became an in-betweener there.
And then he rose to animator And his first credit is on an Oswald rabbit called The Singing Sap from 1930.
For the longest time, I wasn't interested in animation. I'll try it, but I'll stick to my comic strip. But I kept on getting nothing but rejects.
Tex grew up in the time where animation began to blossom. Famous comic strip characters began to become their own stars in animation. Gertie the Dinosaur by Winsor McKay came out during Fred's youth. Come on out, Gertie. Introduce yourself to everyone. Thanks, Gertie. Gertie! Gertie! Why don't you dance for everyone? Gertie, dance! Gertie! Thanks, Gertie. Slapstick was developing and flourishing with the likes of Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd.
Like Chaplin had a lot of balletic grace, and a lot of these guys had it down to a science. Tex Avery wanted to do the same thing in his animation.
While working at Lance, Avery met director Bill Nolan.
He invented rubber hose animation to kind of get away from the stilted, kind of angular looking. Bill Nolan would kind of delegate Avery to just improvise animation and gags as it went along.
It became funnier and funnier the longer it ran. So in those days, Tex was fortunate in that things were so loose. If somebody had a funny idea, they just let him take it as far as possible, and they wouldn't cut it on him. So that's how he learned to animate.
These animators were their own gag men.
Tex, of course, had a very low opinion of his animation. He never liked it.
I realized there at Lance that most of these fellows could draw rings around me.
Tex would work his hardest to draw rings around around them.
And Lance let him direct a couple of pictures that Bill Nolan, of course, got the credit for.
We were all a group of crazy gagsters that would attempt anything for a laugh.
He would, take a decaying animal hide like a skunk or a rabbit and put it under somebody's light table so that when the light was turned on, it would kind of cook a little bit and smell up the place.
One routine was the rubber band and paper spitball. You'll pop a guy, hit him, and he'll yell, "Bullseye!"
And someone turned around and it wasn't a spitball, it was a paper clip. But then I read somewhere else it was a thumbtack. But I still think it was something that was pulled back in a rubber band, and Tex, and he turns around and it just takes his eye out.
That lost me an eye in a split second.
Tex had a salary dispute with Lance.
I was having money troubles, then I heard there was going to be a change over at Warner's, and I applied.
On the strength of those two pictures, he went to Leon Schlesinger.
Once again, I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Say, I'm going to the bowl.
But Jack King had left, and Leon needed another director to fill in.
Warner Brothers haven't had a main star like Disney's Mickey Mouse or Fleischer's Popeye. They tried before with Bosco, Buddy, and Beans.
He showed a model sheet of Porky and the gang from I Haven't Got a Hat.
Riz had these little guys coming up, doing different acts. And here comes a big Og, and he stutters. He stutters, and it's funny as heck.
Boy, I wish I'd stay on the farm.
Is Mama's little man afraid?
Avery saw possibilities in Porky Pig. He wanted Porky to be the star.
And the first picture he made there was Gold Diggers of 49. Tex started experimenting with speed effects. It had a wonderful, fast effect that nobody had really achieved up to that point. Was already experimenting with getting the tempo up, kind of moving it from the laconic kind of pace of the early 30s sound cartoons, and his pictures were a lot livelier than some of the other directors because of that. The only pencil test you had was to shoot everything meticulously on a camera and process the film, look at it on a moviola.
He would cut sections out just to get the timing right.
And it can be that single frame, that 1/24th of a second, that will transform something from being sort of funny to being really funny and really accenting the physicalness of that humor.
We worked every night. Jones, Clampett, and I were all young and full of ambition.
They pretty much went down to this run-down bungalow and they named it Termite Terrace because of the bad shape it was in. It must have been unpainted wood, and I bet you there were probably bent nails and all that.
I tried to do something I thought I would laugh at if I were to see it on the screen, rather than worry about, will a 10-year-old laugh at this? Because we couldn't top Disney. So we went for adults and young people. I'm quite a duck hunter, and we started kicking around a duck picture,
which led to the creation of Daffy.
That's a good boy, that sure gets me.
Daffy Duck.
There weren't any cartoon characters that acted this completely nutty
Guy that never took a lesson in his life.
or screwy as that duck had been.
Daffy was still the early version before he'd been refined and was sort of the woo-hoo-hoo-hoo and, you know, the over-the-top crazy.
Tex would one-up his looniness in 1944 with the character Screwy Squirrel at Metro.
Squirrel, squirrel, that little bastard. Let's not talk about him.
Oh, okay then. A majority of his characters have been one note.
Right, and again, Droopy is a sort of a one-note character. He just basically, it's the same gag. He's just coming back and showing up whenever he's supposed to, you know, show up and shock the audience. So it's just shock after shock after shock.
Wild Hair, of course, was his big breakthrough. You know, solidifying the character of Bugs Bunny is one of the few times that Tex actually got into a character with a very definite personality.
Ben Hardaway directed Porky's Hare Hunt, and that featured a crazy rabbit character, and in his words, he put a rabbit suit on a duck.
We thought of a Brooklyn-esque smart aleck who knew everything. And the opening line was,
What's up, Doc?
and gee, it floored them. They expected the rabbit to scream, or anything but a casual remark. Here's a guy with a gun at his face.
Kind of proud of that. I remember him telling that story over and over again. He said, that's his whole character, and it took off from there. I think he was kind of proud that he kind of set that franchise, you know, and it was something that they could build on. Bugs became this huge star. One of the breakout successes in animation is that he could sort of reach across the footlights. Sort of, people thought of him as more than a drawing. He becomes this character. It seems like everybody knows him for some reason.
I've always felt that what you did with a character is more important than the character itself. It's what they say and do that builds up their personality.
Once Schlesinger left these animators alone, the only thing they had to do was be on budget, be on time. You could do whatever you want.
We would cash out our checks at noon Thursday, and at 5 o'clock we'll get a call from Leon's office. He'd have 25 poker chips stacked up, and you put down $25. One person would win $125. The rest would lose. And you didn't have a say in this. You had to go in whether you wanted to or not. People won't believe that unless they knew Leon Schlesinger. And then there was Fred Quimby over at Metro. Now, he was strictly a businessman.
Beginning. Fred Quimby, right. So people always think that he had something to do with the cartoons. And no, he was just, I mean, he did, but I mean, nothing creative with it. But he was always a guy that, you know, that ended up going on stage when somebody won. And
he knew nothing about stories or gags or whatnot. And he'd admit it. There were times we would have the storyboard all set up, and we'll explain it to him and everything. He would look at it and look at it and just say, "Boys, I don't like it."
He had the two characters jump off a cliff, and they kept on jumping, and they jumped 3 times.
I think one's enough, of course. To test the audience's patience today is even taxing. Tex also wanted to do a series of live-action animals with animated mouths.
We've got an animal, a little stock shot of a desert horned toad from the library, and I animated one line. "I don't care what you say, I'm horny." Schlesinger wanted to do his cartoons. We had quite an argument there, and it eventually ended up laying me off for an 8-week period.
He ultimately went to Jerry Fairbanks Productions to work on Speaking of Animals. He pitched this to Jerry Fairbanks.
I made 3 there. I had a deal with the boys, and there again, I felt I was entitled to a little more money. We had a falling out, and I sold my shares to Fairbanks.
Speaking of animals,
that was the
very
second one
successful,
released.
And it would win an Oscar.
Blitzwolf
in
was the
best
first
live
release,
action
but that was the
short
second one in production. But they were in production so close together. And right from the beginning, when the MGM lion roars to hold that tiger in beat, you know it's present.
This first picture for him was the Blitzwolf.
because here you have, you know, you hire someone, you give him a 5-year contract, and the first film comes in, and he gets a nomination.
The United States got involved in World War II, and many men were drafted to fight overseas.
All of a sudden, you've effectively gone from working out in the field with the cows to operating these incredibly modern mechanized tanks and futuristic weapons and huge bombs and machine guns and all that stuff. It's a big flip.
Metro had a lot of power, and they would give us training films instead. We would do so much for the Army and Navy and still make a skeleton number of theatrical cartoons. Thereby, a lot of fellows got deferments.
Red Hot Riding Hood is way up there in 1940s animation. I've heard rumors that production drawings or cells were stolen that had Red Hot Riding Hood on them from certain artists. This was during the war period. This was during the wartime, and, you know, this is during the war period, and a lot of gags with this kind of sexual lust were in vogue then.
The whole wolf would become erect when he saw the character, the Preston Blair females that were made in the cartoons.
When the censors saw it, boy, he's getting too worked up.
It was kind of funny how that picture originally ended. I think the wolf actually sort of is in a shotgun marriage and is forced to marry the grandma, and they have three little wolves who cheer Red Hot Riding Hood at the end. You know, she's doing her performance again. They're doing that, but for some reason that didn't go with the Breen office. The censor said, "No, this is bestiality. You can't have this." So Tex changed it to the wolf committing suicide at the end, and his spirit is still so lustful that it comes out of his body and is still pounding the table and going crazy over Red Hot Riding Hood at the end.
You know, you tend to look at the middle of his MGM stage as being where a lot of the strongest work came through.
He created such classics as Bad Luck Blackie, where a bulldog runs across a black cat, and Bad Luck Ensues, and King Size Canary, where the characters grew and grew.
these huge creatures now standing on the world is this big, and there's like a rat that's this size and a cat that's this size on this world. I guess you couldn't push past that because you can't really stand on a solar system. You can't really stand on the universe, although you could possibly.
Tex Avery was so wrapped up in his work all the time. Chuck Jones told a story about how he was so involved with his work at Warner Brothers that he held off going to the bathroom. He had to go to the hospital for it, and they had to install a catheter in him.
He really cared quite a lot. And that's, again, like I say, why he got exhausted several times in his career, and he just had to take time off. He just got too involved with it. And he probably found himself heading for a nervous breakdown.
He also felt insecure that when he wasn't being creative, he was letting the studio down, whether it be Warner Brothers or MGM. In the Leon Schlesinger era, he actually would take an exposure sheet with him while he was walking down the hallway if he ever passed by the producer Leon Schlesinger, just to show that he was working. He was so dead set on trying to get these cartoons out as well.
Tex went on a year-long... That's it. I'm done. Can someone kick this guy out? No? We're gonna go on an intermission.
Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?
Here, my love, in the bushes at the bottom of the garden.
Good night, good night. Parting is such sweet sorrow, really it is.
Oh, my darling, my only one. I love you more than anything. This is killing me. Oh, Juliet, my love, let me thrill again to the soft, sweet tones of your voice.
Tex would go on a year-long sabbatical to recover from exhaustion.
And then he came back in October 1951, and his cartoons are not as strong as when he was at his prime.
When I came back, I had a different attitude. I would loosen up the scenes and let the animator take some responsibility. I didn't worry about the stories, and they came out just as well.
And then they adapted into 1950s UPA, which was sort of anti-Disney and anti-even Warner Brothers or MGM, just anti-animals hitting each other and, you know, and jokes. Like, we want to actually have humans in here. And
Avery's unit was shut down early, and it only left the Hanna-Barbera unit in operation. He left the studio about 3 months later.
Avery left MGM after over 13 years of reinventing the way we see animation.
And Tex starts with Walter Lantz, and then after his whole time at Warner Bros. MGM, ends up back at Walter Lantz.
Lantz admired Tex's humor, even back in the 30s. So he directed 4 cartoons there.
He tried to make Tex a really good deal where Tex would get profit sharing and all that stuff. But then when Tex was actually in a working relationship with Walter Lantz, he studied his contract pretty carefully. And
oh, brother, you never get a time out of this. You're getting charged for everything but the paving out front of the studio. So, I gave up there and went to commercials.
One of his animators, Mike Law, took him to a studio called Cascade, where they made commercials. And he thought that was a lot better than just making these 6-minute cartoons with a big budget. Now he could do about a minute's worth. And he said, you just do it in 3 weeks, hand it to the animators, boom, you're done.
here's like Tex working late at night, you know, at Cascade, you know, looking through the viewfinder of the camera and fretting over every movement of the Pillsbury Doughboy. And very long sessions, because that was very slow work, just moving the figure of the Doughboy frame by frame.
He even did Kool-Aid spots with Bugs Bunny, but the thing is, they didn't know that Tex created Bugs Bunny.
The agency people said, "Wonder if Avery knows how to draw Bugs Bunny." I think that's when I started making clear who just created him.
Not to bring the story down or anything, but he had a son who unfortunately passed away from, I believe, a heroin overdose.
Yeah, and that changed Tex's whole life. Tex kind of folded up after that. We didn't see him very much anymore. He kind of withdrew.
Tex was struggling with alcoholism during that period at Cascade. One of the people I talked to said that when they met him at Cascade, they could smell the liquor on his breath.
He spent his last years working for Bill and Joe, doing TV stuff. But he was frustrated there tremendously because he couldn't. There was just no time for him to do his post-production kind of attitude, kind of stuff like he used to do.
Tex really admired people who enjoyed his work.
He kind of liked to reminisce a little bit. The fan art hadn't really caught up with him at that time.
Even if sometimes he denigrated them. He didn't like all the sign gags and explosions that were in his cartoons. When he came out of screenings, he would just put them down like that.
It's not like what it used to be. We were all young, and we had a lot of fun making these darn things. Then it became serious. Business later, as we got older. It cost more money, and there was more on your shoulders. I miss the creative end of it. Building the gags, I do miss them theatricals, but I'll never go back to them.
In 1980, he passed away, leaving behind a great legacy for generations to come in terms of animation and film comedy.
But when I work with students, the idea of whatever you think is an extreme position, double that, triple that. Really push that much past the point at which you think is beyond the point of, of no return, and then you might start to get a reaction that you're hoping for.
It would be a sad world if somebody like Tex Avery was forgotten in the annals of animation history, because what he gave animation was this nice brash outlook on life and not anything artificed like Disney's was at the time. I think that's why everybody loves his work.
Well, folks, how did you like my picture?